All right. So, that is not... Hang on one second. That is not... Always something. Hang on. You know what? I'll leave it as is. Whatever. I'll leave it as is. Okay. So, presentation time. Yes. All right. So, let us begin tonight. First of all, how y'all doing? Welcome. Hope you're having a shway Monday, baby. I haven't done the podcast thing for a while. Kind of got thrown to the wayside with some things, and Lord knows I'm terrible about continuing projects that I start. Absolutely the worst. Absolutely the worst. But I've been wanting to kind of bring it back and get back into the groove of things with that and for a while. So, a couple of things to talk about tonight. The Last of Us Part 1 Remake, retailing at $70. The subject matter of digital gaming versus physical games, or how you buy games and whatnot nowadays, and related to Assassin's Creed Liberation getting taken off of Steam, along with other digital games that have been taken off of their platforms, and a World of Warcraft topic with the ever controversial statement of bring the player, not the class. So, with that being said, let us get on to our first subject tonight. Again, welcome one and all. Thank y'all for being here tonight. Hope you're having a shway Monday. It's good to be back with the podcast. So, let's get on with our first topic tonight. The Last of Us Part 1 Remake has retailed at $70. Now, this is not the first game on PlayStation 5 that has come out at this price, and it has been a source of contention even before the PlayStation 5 was even coming out. A lot of people might remember that the Demon's Souls remake, which was a launch title for the PlayStation 5, also retailed around this price, or something very close to it. And some people were kind of contentious against it, but I don't think they were quite as against it then, just because of all of the hype around the PlayStation 5 and the new Xbox coming out. Now, as we all know, there is I guess what you could call a console war again on Twitter, and it only has seemed to grow and fester as this previous generation and this current generation have marched on and is still marching on. If you had to ask me what was the last console war that mattered, to me it was the one between Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. But that's also because we weren't trying to kill each other over it, and also because that one was fun, and also we were children, and also we didn't have social media. So, that was then, this is now. And nowadays, if you like waffles on Twitter, everyone will automatically assume that you hate pancakes. Or if you like Coca-Cola, everybody will assume that you hate Pepsi. And so it's this thing of, looking for reasons to, bitch about things. Maybe because they don't have anything to bitch about. But when it comes to the pricing of games, historically, games have always kind of been pricey. Even going back into the 90s with Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, especially that era, people have stated before that games have never been at this price before, and that is incorrect. You can actually do a Google search, especially if you were buying games from Toys R Us back in the day. You can look up articles and magazines, stuff like that, or things that had, the Toys R Us shopping guide, stuff like that. And games were very much expensive back then. Of course, inflation has taken effect. Money did not have the value back then that it has now, for better or for worse, mostly for the worst. But either way, there were games priced at what was considered $60 then and $70 now. Of course, go by today's standards, it's even more. But even then, games have never been cheap, with some exceptions, games around the $20 range, free to play, things like that. Games have never been cheap, especially when it comes to AAA titles. They've never been cheap. The gold standard has always been, at the most, outside of collector's editions, around the $60 range. But this has seemed to be more of a common thing that we're seeing with the new generation, especially with PlayStation 5. Like I said, Demon Souls Remake retailed at this price, and now The Last of Us is retailing at this price. I think one reason why people weren't as mad about Demon Souls Remake getting put at that price may have been the fact that Demon Souls came out back in 2009. And up until its remake release on the PlayStation 5, up until then, it had been stuck on the PlayStation 3. It didn't get ports. It wasn't transferred to the PS4. There was no version of it on PlayStation Now. There was no PC version, outside of emulation, of course. Literally, the sole variation of Demon Souls was stuck on the PlayStation 3, digital and physical. And then after that, of course, Dark Souls took off, and the rest is history. The Last of Us, though. The Last of Us came out not even 10 years ago. Last of Us Part 1 came out not even 10 years ago. It's not even a decade old at this point. It's roughly around 9 years or so. It has already been remastered and ported to PlayStation 4. Because if you might remember, The Last of Us Part 1, of course it was just called The Last of Us back then, Last of Us came out on PlayStation 3 originally. And it was a smashing success. It was then ported later as a remastered variant with some cleaned up graphics and whatnot to the PlayStation 4. And here we are, not even a decade later, and the first Last of Us game is getting a remake, cleaned up, new models, everything else. Simplified combat system. The whole paint job that a remake would get, very similar to what was done with Demon Souls. Although I will wager that Blue Point knows how to make games much prettier than a lot of developers out there. And so this has raised the question of why, of all the games, not only why is this game the one that they decided is deserving of a $70 price tag, but also they have asked the question, why is this game the one that is deserving of a remake when so many other franchises under the Sony umbrella have been, for the most part, ignored? And I think the simple answer is this. Because people buy it. Because people bought The Last of Us 2. Because people bought The Last of Us remaster that was on PS4. Because people bought The Last of Us on PlayStation 3. People genuinely love The Last of Us, and it's easy to understand why. It's a good story. People love a good post-apocalyptic setting. The combat has only gotten better with The Last of Us 2. Not everybody was a fan of The Last of Us 2's story and their portrayal of their characters and things that happened within the story. But the majority of players that did play it did love it. And it is what it is. It won awards. It made lots of money. It did everything that a AAA title was supposed to do. It succeeded. And it's easy to see why it succeeded. Even if you're not a fan of the game, it is easy to see why this franchise succeeds as it does. It basically took everything that made Uncharted amazing and almost gave it a Resident Evil Mad Max feel. There is some horror element to it as well, like I said, with the Resident Evil comparison. Also, it doesn't help the fact that a Last of Us show is coming out, and maybe they would like to promote that a little more. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when the Warlords of Draenor expansion was coming out for World of Warcraft. It's no coincidence that around the same time, the World of Warcraft movie was coming out. And they were very heavily cross-promoting these things. There were even in-game transmog items you could get with Warlords of Draenor that were based off of weapons and things like that from the Warcraft movie. Which, needless to say, there's nothing wrong with cross promotion. Nothing wrong at all. You know, I mean, why not? It's basically advertisements within advertisements. You know, so there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I think the biggest debate is why, out of all these franchises, why is Sony demanding that this is the one? And why does it deserve it when things like Legend of Dragoon has been ignored? When things like Crash Bandicoot have, while not completely ignored, have kind of been left to the wayside? You know, things of that nature. Why has Bloodborne once again been left in the dust? That is another major question that fans are still asking. You know, Bloodborne, a game that is considered the magnum opus of From Software. Even after Elden Ring came out, many people still consider Bloodborne to be the magnum opus of From Software. And it's hard to argue against that. And yet there it is, stuck on PlayStation 4, still locked at 30 frames per second. Sly Cooper is another one. One of my chat just said. Sly Cooper is another franchise that has been sorely ignored. There are many games under the Sony umbrella that have been ignored. And yet here they are pushing out this golden goose. I guess we really can call it that. The golden goose of Sony. Jak and Daxter. Yes, there are many. There are many Sony franchises that have been ignored. And yet here they are pushing out what some people are starting to call the golden goose of Sony, The Last of Us, once again. And people are hoping that it cleans up at awards. And some would even debate that this is the greatest game ever made. And that, in itself, is subjective. You know, anybody could consider games over a decade old the greatest of all time. Some consider World of Warcraft to be the greatest game of all time. Some people consider Chrono Trigger to be the greatest game of all time. Some people consider Halo to be the greatest game of all time. Some people consider Mega Man X, Dark Souls, Elder Scrolls Skyrim. There are so many games that can be subjectively named as the greatest game of all time. Personally speaking, no, I do not think The Last of Us is the greatest game of all time, nor do I think that it tells the best story ever told. You know, I certainly think it does a good job at, you know, what it does, and it certainly excels in the graphical department, gameplay, animation, music, things of that nature, whatnot. The story can get a little divisive. Not everyone, like I said, not everyone was a fan of the second game story. And it's funny that more people loved, or in my opinion, I think more people ended up loving the first one more than the second one. And that could be another factor of why the first one is getting a remake. But it still brings up the contentious factor of it's not a decade old. It's already been remastered and ported once. And here we go with full-blown remake at $70. Personally, I do not think it is worth $70. I have not seen a reason why it is worth $70. I would go to bat for Demon's Souls Remake being $70 simply because it was trapped on a system from two generations and platforms ago with 0 ports and their online servers dying and it getting a total paint job from the bottom up. I would argue that that was more justified than this one because it's not even a decade old. It's still the same content. It's not like they're adding new content or anything like that. It's the same story. It's the same voice actors. It's the same content. It's the same boss battles. It's the same exploration. None of that has been changed. Literally all it has gotten is a very, 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 very pristine coat of paint. And this is not a knock at their dev team, their art department, their programmers. This is not a knock at them at all, but it's not like Naughty Dog is hurting for money either. And this is not solely all the blame placed on Naughty Dog either. This was a decision by Sony, the higher ups at Sony. You have to always remember the dev team doesn't always have the complete and total say when it comes to the pricing of their games. It's also mostly up to the publisher, and or for the most part anyway. And you'll have to remember, Sony does own this franchise. They do own that studio. They're the ones ultimately who have the say-so on things of, pricing. So this is a Sony thing. And quite frankly, I have yet to see a reason of why, after already a port and a remaster and all this other support and everything else that this particular franchise has gotten, I personally do not think that this remake is worth $70 because I have not seen anything that makes it worth $70. I would understand 60 maybe. I would personally say 50 would probably be a better offer, but 70, I think they're asking far too much. But unfortunately, what's going to happen is the same thing that happens with Skyrim. Unfortunately, it will sell, and it will probably sell well because people will buy it. So until customers really start answering with their wallet, $70 could become the new norm, unfortunately. Personally, though, I do not think it is worth it. Let me get a sip here. Some comments from the viewers here. It's Naughty Dog's Skyrim, essentially. Agreed, it's good, but it's not that good. I'm just waiting for people to notice the remake having some assets that are entirely unchanged from the original. If they bundle Last of Us Part 1 and 2 for PS5, I could maybe see 70. The greatest game of all time is Ocarina of Time. Who knows? Who knows? So now on to our next topic tonight, which is digital games versus physical games. And there is some added context to this as to why I'm talking about this particular subject. It was announced today that Assassin's Creed Liberation would be taken off of Steam. And at first, it created a lot of uproar. Because at first the understanding was even if you bought it, you would not be able to play it anymore, and it would be just taken straight out of your library. I personally did not see how they could do that or legally do that, because again, you bought it, and and just straight out ripping it out of someone's library, to me, seems like a very big breach. Now, of course, you can buy games and they no longer be online, especially if it's an online game. Of course, that of course has happened, especially as you can see in the thumbnail here where it says Super Mario Brothers 35, which I'll talk about that in a minute. Ubisoft did comment saying that, no, if you bought it, you'll still be able to play it. It's simply will not be available on the store, on Steam, and the online components will no longer be active. Now, I personally do not know how active the online world of Assassin's Creed Liberation really was. I have personally played Assassin's Creed Liberation, and it was actually pretty good when it first came out. I must admit. It actually was pretty good. But then this also raises the question and the debate of physical games versus digital games, or digital versus physical games. Because unfortunately, that is the possibility and the risk that one does take when buying digital games. It could come to a point where a publisher or developer decides to take their digital game off of a platform, off of a online store. That could happen at any time for any reason they deem necessary. For example, like I said, Assassin's Creed Liberation. They took it off for their own reasons. A boneheaded move by Nintendo a while back was them deactivating Super Mario Brothers 35. And basically what Super Mario Brothers 35 was basically they took the original Super Mario Brothers and turned it into a online competitive 35-man battle royale. And it worked. It very, very much worked. And it worked in the sense of you would go through these familiar stages, all 8 worlds of Super Mario Brothers 1. And for every enemy you defeated, you would send an enemy to another player's screen or stage, and they would have to contend with extra enemies that could pop up on screen. When you gather coins, you can use those coins for power-ups and things like that to help you progress. So, by all means and understanding, it worked. And it was popular. People loved it. People absolutely loved this game. And then Nintendo did the boneheaded move of what I consider the boneheaded move of the century by Nintendo. And that was completely take off the online for Super Mario Brothers 35. It cannot be downloaded. The online is dead. This game can basically not be played. And at first, the only way that you could have played it was to even have the Nintendo Online membership, which allows you to play online with your Nintendo Switch for a majority of their games. So in a world where you want people to buy your online service and you bundle these games in which to play the online service with the online service, and then you deactivate them, and then you deactivate it after a certain amount of time, after promoting it so heavily during the 35th anniversary of your main mascot, if they were trying to get more people to sign up for their Nintendo Online service, this, in my opinion, is not the way to go about it, especially after promoting it so heavily. It makes zero sense. You could get more people to sign up for your service by using a game like this. They use Tetris 99 and Pac-Man 99 in this regard to buy it, to promote their service. You even use the Mario 3D All-Star Collection, which had a digital and physical release. And then it was taken off of their store, and then they printed no more copies. So it really comes down to, in the end, what is the safer road to travel when it comes to buying video games? Now, PC players, unfortunately, do not have much of a choice in this factor, because pretty much the only way that you can buy PC games is through digital means, whether it be Steam, the Epic Store, straight from the websites themselves, like Final Fantasy XIV Windows version, Battle.net. Pretty much 99.9% of PC games are direct digital games now. But that is not the case for all games when it comes to Nintendo Switch and PlayStation and Xbox. Majority of games have a digital and a physical variant to their games. But when I see things like this, it makes me personally feel better about my choice to buy most of my games as physical discs. Because like I said, they could choose, a publisher and a developer could choose at any point to take a game off of an online store. And they've done this, and like I said, they've done this before when sometimes for good reasons, like say there was a problem with a game. They would take it down, fix it, and then, repost it. But then again, you have also asshole moves like Sega. Leading up to the release of Sonic Origins. Originally, Sonic 1, 2, and I believe Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and if I'm not mistaken, Sonic CD as well, I could be wrong about that, were all available as individual games on the Nintendo Switch. Again, I could be wrong about a few of those, but I know for a fact that Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 were available as individual games on the Nintendo Switch that you could buy individually. And they were maybe $5 to $7. They were not that expensive. And these versions of these games had Tails as playable character. They had Knuckles as a playable character. They had separate modes. They had all kinds of content in there. But basically, you could play Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 as individual games. So as the release of Sonic Origins got closer, Sega decided to remove the individual games from the Nintendo Switch's store, and I believe from other stores as well, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, the individual variations of these games were taken down. Why? Because they wanted people to buy Sonic Origins, which is a compilation of Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles and CD. With some improvements like the drop dash and being able to choose different characters in different games, goals that you can, miniature goals that you can work towards, and some other things that they tweaked within the game itself. Unfortunately, Sonic Origins has not received a whole lot of praise because of the news that broke out that Sega did not use the variation that the developer that worked on it. They did not use their complete variation and even changed a lot of things. There are a lot of bugs and glitches within the game. There is a very, 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 very sus DLC microtransaction stuff added to this game that adds very minuscule things like characters and icons and backgrounds and things like that. Things that are just that they sell for pennies, but at the same time, it's just to get a few extra dollars out of you for things that are not that have no weight or purpose to the game at all. And it did not help that the game retailed for $40. 4 games that are nearly 30 years old at this point, because Sonic 1 didn't come out until the early 90s, and Sonic and Knuckles came out around the mid-90s. So these are games from the early to mid-90s, and they've been on many different platforms. They have re-released these games plenty of times. And even then, like, it's been on the Wii. It's been on, of course, they released it on Sega Saturn as a collection with Sonic Jam. It was on, they had a GameCube collection. They had a collection for it on PlayStation 2. It's been on the Game Boy Advance. It's been on the DS. It's been on, the 3DS. It's been on the Wii U. They were on the Switch individually. They've been on Xbox. They've been on PlayStation. So they've been on PC. They're on phone. So it's not like getting the original 4 or 5 Sonic games was an impossible task. Until they decided to rip those individual games from the current platforms and making it the only way that you could get or play these was through the very, very contentious Sonic Origins. So once again, there it is, a developer and a publisher ripping something off of a digital store, making it unavailable to buy unless you do it by their means. And then I look over, and this might be a little flexing on my part. I look over to my left over here to my shelf, and here I am with physical variations of Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles and Sonic CD in their original formats. That was the other thing about Sonic Origins. They decided to change a lot of the music, probably for legal reasons. But it's not like you cannot get these games at all. In fact, if you bought these individual games, you probably still have them on platforms that you've had before. Now, I will say some people prefer to buy digital because simply it is ease of access. Understandable. It's so much easier to click a button, putting your debit card information, and now it's yours. Instead of getting in the car, going down the street, walking into a store, picking out the game, hoping that they've got it, talking to a person behind the desk, praying they don't run you over with all kinds of offers and details and everything else, praying that they don't do that. So I understand the ease of access. So really it comes down to what is the smarter version? What is the smarter path to take here between digital and physical? And honestly, I think it comes down to preference. I think it does. And also, what's just easier for you? Personally, I prefer physical because, one, novelty, but also just in case, like I said, in case a developer decides to take something off of a store and now I have no way to get it or limited ways to get it. At least I can look over and there is that physical disc. But I also understand that with physical, maybe availability would be a problem. Damage that could happen to a disc itself. So there's pros and cons to each. There's not really a right answer to this. But my thing is this: if you're going to put a game on your store, on an online store, only to re-release it later or use it as a promotion for a service, you better leave it up there. In the case of, like, say, Mario 35 or the individual Sonic games, you better leave it up there because it's not easy to hide what you're trying to do when you just re-release them later in a compilation. And now for the fun one. Yep, it's easy for me to buy digital because of anxiety and time management. I do what I can to get physical editions. Gearbox did this with Battleborn, and I was so upset about it. Had a whole story campaign you could play alone, but no, they completely closed everything off. Super Mario Bros. 35 sounds fun. It was fun. It absolutely was. And now, ladies and gentlemen, now for the fun one. Are you ready? Here we go. Bring the player, not the class. This was something that was pushed very heavily back when Wrath of the Lich King first came out with World of Warcraft. And it goes back even further than that, all the way back to vanilla. Because it used to be bring the class, not the player. And basically what the phrase bring the player, not the class means is this. A developer wants you to feel like you can play any job or class in your MMORPG and not be constrained by what you can and cannot do. And so they add little things like things every job or class can bring to a raid or things like that. There are pros and cons to this. You could potentially increase the number of people that could be brought into a raid. You could. But there is one major con with this. There is a major con with this. And to this day, it is still something that plagues World of Warcraft and its player base. It plagues it extremely hard. For one, another reason that they did this was they wanted to try and cut down on griefing within the game. Well, it's an MMO, and there's only so much you can do about that unless you take action yourself. Players, even now, especially nowadays, are very, from what I've seen on Twitter and things like that, from a lot of the WoW accounts and the WoW Twitter community, are very much in favor of bring the player, not the class. Because what it originally was, when World of Warcraft Vanilla came out, and even going into Burning Crusade, what you would have is you would have a very diverse raid group. It wouldn't be just these select classes and things, because certain classes could only do certain things. For example, there was a boss in the raid, in the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj, or Ruins of Ahn'Qiraj. It was in the Ahn'Qiraj raid back in vanilla. There was a green ooze boss, and the only way that you could weaken him, he was resistant to everything else. No, all other forms of damage. The only way you could break through his defenses was with ice magic. Naturally, the only class that could wield ice magic were frost mages, or mages that knew frost magic. Which most mages, well, all mage specializations could use frost magic between arcane and fire and frost. Naturally, at that point in World of Warcraft, frost was the only viable spec, or was the top viable spec for mages. Arcane was not existent. Nobody played an arcane mage. It couldn't be done. Fire had not yet popped off yet because the gear to make it pop off and the balancing that it needed to pop off, or not balancing, I should say, the patching that needed to be done to make fire mages viable had not happened yet, or was soon around the corner. Frost was the viable way to go. So naturally, they bore his weakness. And once he took enough hits from ice magic and things like that, his defenses would break, he would freeze, and then everybody could curb stomp him with melee attacks and things like that. You could also enchant your melee weapon if you were a melee class like a rogue or a warrior or things like that. There was an enchantment you could give that would cause frost damage, and you could take that route. The problem was that means you would have to you would have to sacrifice your enchantment on your weapon that could also raise your stats. So there was a risk to that. But again, those were decisions that had to be made. So, and then there were also classes that had individual perks that they brought to the raid. For example, Holy Paladins would bring buffs. Even Warlocks brought certain buffs. Shamans brought certain buffs and debuffs to the raid group. And when you got into Burning Crusade and they increased the debuff limit on bosses, rogues were finally able to poison bosses. Originally, they had to ask permission to do that in vanilla because there were only so many debuff slots. Rogues could poison the bosses now with their, the various poisons they could coat on their weapons. So things like that. But these were things that were unique to these classes. They were very unique and made them stand out from the rest. And when they introduced Bring the Player, Not the Class, and really started to promote this, which I understand that there was well-intention behind this. I do get that. But at the same time, when they did this, they also opened the floodgates to a storm of problems. For one, trying to make everything viable only creates more of a balancing problem, especially in an MMO with multiple specs. There's some MMOs that can pull this off very nicely. World of Warcraft has always had this problem when it has come to balancing. For example, I'll use the Rogue. Now, instead of, here is the viable PvE talent tree with, up until that point in Wrath, up until that point it was always combat. And sometimes assassination if you decided to go daggers. But things like the subtlety spec, that was very heavily geared towards PvP, just because of its focus on stealth and things like that, and bleeds. It was very, very heavy PvP focused. And it would not be until later in Wrath that assassination would become viable. But now, take my own experience, for example. I had played a combat rogue throughout Burning Crusade when I started, and throughout my entire leveling experience and experience through Wrath. I had stayed a combat rogue. It was what I was comfortable with. It was what I know I could push out good damage with. I was familiar with it, and I genuinely enjoyed it. And I think this was the case for a lot of rogues. But then I got to Icecrown Citadel, the final raid of World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King. And suddenly, because of this new patch, combat was no longer viable. It wasn't anything I was doing wrong. It wasn't anything that I didn't understand about the job or the class or the spec. It was simply because assassination got buffed through the roof. Assassination was now the spec for rogues going into Icecrown Citadel. And if you did not choose the assassination specialization in Wrath of the Lich King by the time ICC came out, you were not going to do enough damage. You just weren't. And so I didn't believe this at first. And so I did a rotation test on a dummy using the add-on recount so I could see my DPS numbers. And then I swapped over to a pair of daggers and did the rotation for assassination. And it was a night and day difference. So now I had no choice. And that's the first point that I bring up when I'm talking about bring the player, not the class, and the problems that it has caused. It has created a massive balancing issue. World of Warcraft is never going to be perfectly balanced. But having certain things that were good in your trees, that were good at certain things, and maybe not suitable for others, certainly made the balancing problems a little bit easier. What also happens with bring the player, not the class, is ultimately the thing they're not aiming for. Because they do this to try to crack down on min-maxing. The problem is that's not going to stop the player base. When you get raiding groups together, especially hardcore raiding groups, they are always going to choose the specializations, the jobs with specializations that will put out the highest number. They're always going to do this, or that can give the most to the raid. They're always going to single out which ones do this. So ultimately, the problem does not get solved. If anything, it just makes it worse. Now, I am not saying that raiding should be exclusive to a group of people. Absolutely not. I am not saying that. I am certainly not one of those that believes that raiding should only be accessible to the 1% or anything like that. You know, hypothetically speaking, using it as an anagram, or not an anagram, as an example or whatever. I don't know. I'm not saying raiding should only be done by the smaller percentage or should only be accessible to the 1%, to the smaller percentage. I'm not saying that at all. I think everybody should be able to have a crack at raiding. I think this also comes down to the way that World of Warcraft is designed. With 3 specialization trees, and them trying to make all 3 of those specialization trees of each job viable, they will always have a balancing problem. And you could put all of your focus into one spec that could do so well throughout most of the expansion, and then suddenly one patch or micro patch later, and suddenly your spec does not put out the numbers. It also doesn't help that classes in World of Warcraft don't have a whole lot of individuality anymore. And what I mean by that is this. I spoke earlier about how in the old days of WoW, Paladins for the Alliance, and once in BC happened for the Horde, brought buffs and certain debuffs and things like that that would aid the entire raid, but you could only get it from that class, and so it made them special. Poisons were a thing that were exclusive to rogues, and you could only get it from that class. Things like elemental weakness, or exposing weaknesses, and debuffing defenses, things that were exclusive to a warlock. A shaman's wind totem, increasing, attack speed or lowering threat, things like that. The raw healing output that a holy priest could put out. things like that. Or the mana regen that got brought to a raid by a shadow priest through Vampiric Embrace. Or I think that was one of the moves. But, or hell, even the magic utilization of a mage, the Frost Mage, and then later on a Fire Mage, or just the raw damage output that an Arms Warrior could put out, and the fact that protection tanks were some of the best tanks in the game, and that's what they were known for. And then later on, protection paladins ended up becoming a viable tank by doing things only they could do. It doesn't feel like the uniqueness of the classes are there anymore. Pretty much all the classes can do just exactly, pretty much all the classes can do just about the same thing. So, if the uniqueness is not there, if the classes are no longer unique, what are they going to look at? What are people going to look at next? Well, they're going to look at which one just pushes out the highest number. It's no coincidence that certain jobs, or classes, I should say, it's no coincidence that certain classes have been at the top, especially in the recent expansion. They've been at the top, and they stay at the top. It is no surprise that here we are in the final patch of World of Warcraft Shadowlands. And the top 5 specializations are Demonology Warlock, Subtlety Rogue, Windwalker, Survival Hunter, and Destruction Warlock. This is not shocking at all, because a lot of these have been at the top for majority of the expansion. And then you look all the way down at the bottom, and at the very bottom of the DPS rankings is a Retribution Paladin. And it was not there. It was not there. It was not there for most of the expansion. Feral Druids, they've had problems for years. Arms Warriors, they're up and then they're down. Assassination Rogue is now in the middle. It was near the top, now it's at the bottom, and it's been all over the place. So here it is. The Outlaw Rogues, they've been near the top, they've been stuck in the middle, they've been down at the bottom. Just about every class has been up and down on this list throughout the expansions as time has gone by. So how does it make the player feel when they put all of this time and focus into a specialization, and then one patch or a micro patch later, and then suddenly they cannot put out the numbers that a raid team desires? Because what's going to happen is this. What's the point of bring the player, not the class, if the top 5 are a Demonology Lock, a Sub Rogue, a Windwalker Monk, a Survival Hunter, and a Destro Lock? What's the point of choosing another class if you want to be a serious raider when they're going to look for things like that? And they are. Make no mistake. They are going to look for things like that. They're also not only are they going to look at, your, class that you've chosen, they're going to look at the thing that was also introduced into Wrath, and that is your item level. And item level does have a point. But you could be absolute dog shit at the game. But if your item level is higher than, say, somebody that might be a few levels below you, they're going to take the higher item level at any time. So I don't completely subscribe to the idea of bring the player, not the class, for this other reason as well. And I have to use Final Fantasy XIV as an example. The reason why balancing in Final Fantasy XIV is so much easier to accept is the fact that the jobs do not have different specializations. Every job has its purpose. Paladins, Gunbreakers, Dark Knights, Warriors, they're tanks. White Mage, Astrologian, scholar, sage are healers. Monk, ninja, dragoon, reaper are melee DPS. Bard, dancer, machinist are physical DPS. Red mage, black mage, summoner are magic magic DPS. I'm sure I probably left one out in that list, and if I did, I apologize. But because these jobs have their intended purpose, it's easier to create uniqueness for those jobs. For example, I listed the melee DPS jobs: monk, reaper, ninja, monk, reaper, ninja, samurai. That was the one I forgot, samurai. Monk, reaper, ninja, samurai, dragoon. All 5 of these jobs play different, do something different, and also bring something different to the table when it comes to raiding. For example, a samurai is simply a damage pusher. Their entire moveset and their skill set is designed to hit as hard as possible. They do not bring utility to a raid in any kind of a sense. They are a pure damage beast. But then you look at the dragoon, who does push out good DPS and also brings utility to a raid. For example, it has an ability called Battle Litany, which will increase the critical strike percentage of your raid group, or Eye of the Dragon, or whatever the move is, where you can target another DPS and give them a damage boost. You have Dancer, who gives buffs to your team. You have Red Mage, that can give defensive buffs like Magic Barrier. You have Ninja, that can cause debuffs on the enemy target to take more damage. You have Gunbreaker, that can push out decent DPS numbers, but also is a tank, and also has raid wide. All the tanks pretty much have this. They have raid wide damage debuffs, but the way they utilize them is different. And so when you have that uniqueness in your jobs, it doesn't create a desire to, we only want this. And I know there will be raid groups that only want certain ones, but the ideal setting for a Final Fantasy XIV 8-man party raid is not 2 tanks, 2 healers, and nothing but samurais. The ideal setting is 2 tanks, 2 healers, preferably a pure healer and a shield healer, because there are differences, because you get the best of both worlds in that. 2 melee DPS, preferably 2 of a different job type. One that might be, you could have a dragoon and a monk, or a samurai and a dragoon, or a ninja and a dragoon, or a reaper and a samurai. You could have all different combinations of the melee DPS there. Preferably you want 2 of a different kind. And then you can have your ranged in magic DPS. You could have 2 magics. I've had in my raid group before a red mage and a summoner. I've had a red mage and a bard. I've had a dancer and a red mage. I've had a dancer and a summoner. I've had all different kinds of combinations of these jobs, because magic is ranged DPS. So we have 2 range, that gives us 2 ranged DPS and 2 melee DPS. But one thing that does help that, and some people might say, well, isn't that just bring the class, not the player? Actually, it's not, because the other difference is this. Unlike World of Warcraft, 1 character can play every job in the game. So it comes down to, what does the player want to learn? There will always be raid groups looking for melee DPS and tanks and healers and ranged and magic DPS. There will always be groups looking for them. So it's not like you will run into a situation as much in Final Fantasy XIV where people will say, you're a samurai, or, well, they'll never say that. You're a black mage, we don't want you in the group. Or, you're a white mage, we don't want you in the group. You're a scholar, we don't want you in the group. Because they would prefer an astrologian or a sage. All of the specs are viable. All healing specs are viable. All melee specs are viable. All magic specs are viable. All physical range DPS specs are viable. All tank specs are viable. All of them are viable. It comes down to what can the player do with it and how well are they good at it. So in that case, it's kind of a weird amalgamation of the two. But I do think that in choosing to get so heavily behind bring the player, not the class with World of Warcraft, has set them back and has caused the mentality of raiding being such a mega exclusive thing and creating a toxic environment. I really do think them pushing bring the player, not the class in World of Warcraft, and just the way that World of Warcraft is designed. I think because of the way they do it, and because there's always going to be balancing issues, and at the end of the day, in a game like World of Warcraft, people are always going to choose the specializations that have the best numbers. They're always going to choose that at the end of the day, and that can create more animosity within a player group. I don't know if they'll ever fully fix the problem. It is looking like with Dragonflight, that uniqueness to the classes may be coming back, but they will still run into the problem of which spec is better. I don't know if they'll ever find the solution for the balancing problem. Who's to say? I don't think that people should be cut off from raiding. I think everybody should be given the opportunity for raiding. But at the end of the day, it comes down to how the dev team designs it and how well they can do to accommodate their player base. And also enforcing punishment of negative behaviors as well. And I think 14 does a better job of it than WoW does. So I hope y'all enjoyed that. It was fun to kind of get back into that a little bit there. I will upload the entire thing to YouTube, and I will upload the individuals as well for people that want to just watch the individual ones as well. But yeah, this was fun to get back into. That was a good talk. Yeah, I think I might get back to doing this on the weekly again. I think I will. And I'll just have to do research to look for things to talk about and all of that. But I think this will definitely give some variety. And plus, it felt good to do something kind of different. You know, it really did. It really, 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 really felt good to do something. It felt good to do something different. You know, from the norm of playing games or reacting or anything like that. It was good. It was good. It was very good. It can be good to just get the spaghetti out of the brain. Yeah. Well, I mean, I wanted to add my 2 cents to the conversation was all. So, I'll tell you what. Let me see. Definitely enjoying this. Good. I'm glad y'all enjoyed it. I am glad y'all enjoyed it. I'm